At some point today, you probably glanced at your wrist. Maybe for the time, maybe for a notification, maybe just out of habit. That reflexive downward look that happens before you've decided to do it. It doesn't feel like the result of anything, but that gesture, and a lot of the ones like it, were decided long before you started making them in rooms you weren't in, by people who weren't thinking about you specifically. It just never feels that way, and I think that's worth sitting with. The mechanical watch, the small, portable, accurate one, was mostly a navigation problem at first. Ships were getting lost because calculating longitude required knowing the exact time at a reference point while also knowing the local time, and the clocks available couldn't survive the motion and humidity of a sea voyage. So the problem was, how do you keep accurate time on a ship? The answer, eventually, was a spring mechanism precise enough to hold time through movement. That was the solution. That was what people were trying to do. What actually happened was that accurate portable time spread from ships to pockets, and once people carried time with them, time started to behave differently. Schedules became enforceable. Factory shifts became a thing you could actually coordinate, which, if you think about it for a second, means that somewhere in the chain between "we need to find longitude" and "please be at your desk by 9", there's a single spring mechanism. The person refining it was solving a nautical measurement problem. What they were actually building was the infrastructure for industrial coordination, and I genuinely don't think they knew that. I also don't think they would have been thrilled about it. The shipping container does this in a way that feels almost too mundane to take seriously. Malcolm McLean was a trucking entrepreneur who found loading cargo onto ships inefficient, too slow, too much handling, too much damage. His solution was a standardized metal box. A specific size, a specific corner fitting, designed so that the same container could move from truck to ship to rail without being unpacked and repacked at each transfer. It sounds like a logistics complaint that someone turned into hardware. What it quietly restructured was where things get made. Once moving goods across an ocean became cheap enough, really cheap, almost negligibly cheap relative to manufacturing costs, the calculation of where to produce something changed entirely. Labor costs in different countries became the variable. The container didn't cause offshoring, but offshoring at scale probably needed the container first, and the container looked like a box. House numbering is maybe the strangest one. Maria Theresa of Austria ordered buildings numbered in the 1770s, and the reason was conscription. She needed to find men for the army and couldn't locate them because houses didn't have addresses. You described where someone lived relative to landmarks, to neighbors, to the church. The numbering was an administrative solution to a military problem. What it became was the invisible infrastructure of basically everything else. Mail, census, taxation, emergency services, Google Maps. Every system that requires knowing where something is physically located depends on a solution someone implemented to draft soldiers, and it's been running quietly underneath urban life for 2.5 centuries, without anyone really remarking on it, because by now it just feels like how cities work. Obvious, unremarkable, always already there. Maria Theresa wanted an army, she accidentally got the postal service. There's a pattern in these examples that's almost comforting in retrospect. The watch inventor was solving navigation. The container was a logistics complaint. The numbered house was a military database. Nobody was thinking about factory shifts or global supply chains or urban infrastructure. The consequence was genuinely invisible at the moment of creation. It grew later into the space these inventions opened, without anyone intending it. That's the comforting version. The thing that happens next is slightly different. I think about this when I look at the dashboard of a newer car. The buttons are gone, replaced by a screen, which at first reads like a design preference, a modernization, cleaner lines. But the screen wasn't chosen because someone had a vision for what a car should feel like. It was cheaper, fewer physical components, less copper wiring, one surface instead of 40 separate parts. The cost calculation was mundane. What the cost calculation also happened to enable: software updates, remote feature toggling, behavioral data from millions of drivers. That part came after, or alongside, as a realization of what the cheaper option had quietly made available. And then someone, at some point in some meeting, looked at all of that and said, heated seat subscription. which is, I think, the clearest possible illustration of where this goes. Nobody decided to turn cars into software platforms. It just became possible through a manufacturing decision, and once it was possible, it became policy, and once it became policy, someone started thinking about recurring revenue from your seat temperature. The fitness tracker on a wrist is doing something similar, though the larger consequence is harder to see from here. It started as a running accessory, steps, heart rate, something for people who were already paying attention to those numbers. What it's accumulating is different: sleep patterns, resting heart rate variability, blood oxygen levels, continuous and longitudinal from millions of people for years. That data exists somewhere, and at some point, the question of what it gets used for, by insurers, by employers, by healthcare systems under pressure to predict costs rather than just treat people, that question is going to have an answer. The wearable looks like a fitness feature. It might be the mechanism through which health risk gets quietly calculated and priced in ways that haven't fully arrived yet, but are probably already being modeled. Usage-based pricing is the one where the innocence starts to feel less convincing. You pay per unit of computation, per token, per API call, per whatever the relevant measure is. It sounds like a billing structure, and it is, but it's also a rationing mechanism, and rationing mechanisms determine access in ways that compound. I've noticed myself checking a usage dashboard in a way that feels genuinely new. Watching a number go up, calculating whether what I'm doing is worth the cost, feeling the edge of a limit that I didn't used to feel, and I'm not totally sure what to do with. That might just be a pricing model, or it might be the early infrastructure through which access to certain kinds of leverage gets tiered. Who can afford to think with these tools, at what volume, and who can't? I don't know which one it is. Maybe both simultaneously, which is its own kind of answer. The difference between this and the shipping container is that the people building these things now understand platform dynamics. They've read the history, they know what data accumulation does over time, what rationing mechanisms do to access, what it means when something becomes infrastructure. The fitness tracker company knows that longitudinal health data has value beyond step counts. The car manufacturer knows that a software-defined vehicle has a different relationship to ownership than a mechanical one. The consequence isn't invisible anymore. It's modeled, projected, stress-tested, probably reviewed by a legal team. The pattern is the same as it was in the 1770s. A small decision, quietly load-bearing for something much larger. But the relationship between the builder and the consequence has changed. The watchmaker didn't know. The trucker with the metal box didn't know. Maria Theresa was thinking about soldiers, not mail systems. The not knowing was genuine. It wasn't a choice, it was just the limit of what was visible at the time. What's different now is that some of the people making these decisions do know or know enough, and the infrastructure gets built anyway. The screen goes in because it's cheaper, the data gets collected because it's there, the pricing model gets set because it's rational, each decision is defensible on its own terms. The larger shape only becomes visible later, to people who weren't in the room, living inside something that was decided for them before they had any idea what was being decided. You glance at your wrist, the time, or your heart rate, or both, it depends on what's there. Either way, the gesture feels automatic, feels like nothing, feels like it belongs to you. Most of it does. If something here landed, or didn't, or felt slightly off in a way you want to push back on, the comment section is there. I'm more interested in where the thinking breaks down than where it holds. And if you want more of this, subscribing is apparently how the algorithm decides whether to keep showing it to people, which is its own small illustration of everything we just talked about. See you on the next one.